Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Patrick Global Truth Bomb riffing the con. It looks like it's Monday, September 25th, 2023 at approximately 1:40 p.m. my time. And again, just another sort of layered look at the lens of how the world operates in a way that never ceases to amaze in every direction. And in the Jewish religion, today is Yom Kippur, one of the two holiest of all days on the Jewish calendar throughout the year, and it's known as Yom Kippur, otherwise known as the Day of Atonement. And the greeting that you do on Yom Kippur is Gemar Hatima Tova, which means good final sealing, which is a really fascinating concept when you think about it, because what that means is inscribed in the book of life is a final sealing on your year, given the idea of what the Day of Atonement is all about, which is to ask God for forgiveness and your fellow man, your friends, your family, whoever that you may have sinned against throughout the year. And you're supposed to deeply think about all of those things that are sacred between you and God, because God gave you the breath in your lungs to be able to survive on this planet and everything that comes with it. And then one day you'll be returned dust to dust, ashes to ashes, sort of thing. And the Day of Atonement is prescribed in the book of life, which keeps track of everything that you've done throughout your life. So you have a conscience and you know when you've done right or wrong. And that's the whole idea of religion. And interestingly enough, in the context of the Christian religion, most people will associate what evolved from this tradition and what it became in terms of Catholicism, which is the nature of confession. You know, we've seen in movies where people have gone to their priest. You know, if it happens to be a mob movie, maybe they're asking for forgiveness. Maybe they stroke a check, or they, grease the palms of a priest and they give money to the church and that sort of thing that could be used for, all sorts of good endeavors, but at the same time, maybe came from drug running or murder or any other level of massive sin. And I always found that to be deeply problematic, deeply hypocritical, deeply, shall we say, an expression of the flaw of the human condition, right? It's like those who have character and those who have integrity don't have to ask for forgiveness because they operate with character and dignity in a way that, well, they haven't harmed somebody, so they shouldn't have to ask for forgiveness. And I think back to a lot of the, things I've been saying on these truth bombs as of late. But particularly, I did a piece some time ago on anti-Semitism, and and again, I've mentioned that I'm Jewish. I'm not a really fervent, conservative or Orthodox or somebody that follows in deep traditions or runs a kosher household and that sort of thing. But was raised as a Jew, and I obviously have a very sort of poetic and a deep connection to the notion of Exodus, quite frankly, and the rule of law, which came from Exodus and which has always created my come from. And on my bar mitzvah, my entire bar mitzvah speech was about honesty. And you look through the lens of what's happening in social media in every single direction. And what I've been trying to bring to your attention as I try to develop a connection with an audience out there, which is growing, by the way. And I'm very happy to see more and more interest. And I'm surprised every once in a while. Like last night, I've been off of X for some time because I got censored once again by Elon and the goons at X, because I've been basically given all the bad guys on the right and the Republican side all they can deal with. And, every once in a while I'll make a kind of a silly slip up that I kind of get thrown in X jail for, but which is hypocritical by way of what their policies are, because what I observe, 1,000 times a day are everything that they're holding me accountable to. And I'll tell you, I just happened to mention on Tom Fenton's thread last week, this guy is like, I don't know, he runs this thing called Judicial Watch. He's like this muscular guy. He probably is in some sort of Catholic diocese. That reminds me of, what was that Dan Brown movie that, that had all of the symbology and, the extreme Catholic guy that would beat himself on the back, and, the character that was super intense to create the hierarchy of, quite frankly, this internalized power control of the Catholic faith. Anyway, that seems to play out. It was a Ron Howard film, and it wasn't Angels and Demons. It was the Da Vinci Code, right? So I'm thinking of the Da Vinci Code, and the nature and the magnitude of all things, power and character, and what the outcomes are, and for what purpose, and everything else, and kind of going back to the notion of, the Day of Atonement and confession and those sorts of things. If you murder and you kill and you rape and you launder and you do evil things, you, in my mind, can't look to God and go, hey, let's just forget about it if I make a contribution. Yeah, that's what led to what's known as the schisms in the Christian faith over the course of literally a millennia, out of the Dark Ages, no pun intended, to where they all realized that, wait a second, these priests were taking payments from the monarchies for destroying, the little guy, and basically they could be held on high. And so after hundreds of years of this, centuries of this sort of, hypocrisy and all of the horrible, consequences that it led to, people started saying, like Luther and others in other faiths were like, no, we're not going to play that game. And so they branched off and they said, no, you're not going to be able to pay to have your sins cleansed. And so therefore, that's not what God would ever intend. Because, of course, like I've always said, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And what does that all have to do with everything that's happening based on these truth bombs and what Patrick Lovell is trying to creating a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption? Well, all of it, because that's what we're in the midst of, and we always have. So who is Patrick Lovell? Well, Patrick Lovell is a muckraking producer. I produce a television series called The Con. You can find it for free at www.thecon.tv, which is the most important revelation, literally, of the last 70 years. Because it gives you the blueprint of everything that this system operates by that none of you seemingly understand. Everybody is aware that the system is rigged. Everybody understands that there is corruption involved, but nobody knows what the ABCs are that make it so, let alone the centrifuge of it all, which is the core of all, which is the one thing that I will continue to bring to you that no one, not anybody in supposed independent media, not anybody in mainstream media has brought to you or will bring to you, or anyone in academia, or anybody who is a well-known sort of activist with a lot of followers. No one will reveal to you what is the centrifuge of everything that could then in turn turn everything upside down and inside out to rewrite the ship if you all understood what it meant. What I've continued to bring to you is Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which enables the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, to be the lender of last resort, to provide liquidity, which is money, to any aspect of the economy or financial system to keep our system afloat, because as we all know, money is the lifeblood of everything. You want to buy a house? It takes money. You want to buy a car? It takes money. You want to get, remedy a disease that you may have, or fix a broken bone or an emergency at an emergency room for a hospital and save your life from cancer and whatever else you might be dealing with. It requires money. Money is the lifeblood of everything. And so where does money come from? Does it grow on trees? No, it can be created out of thin air and digits based on monetary policy. And all of it comes from the central bank. And so the central bank of the United States provided tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity illegally to a bankrupted financial system that used fraud, deceptive acts and practices, and racketeering on a level that was global, blew up the world, and of course, we saved the villains that destroyed it all. And then everybody who was a part of the top 10%, quite frankly, circled the wagons to save themselves. And this system has not ended for the last 13 years. All of it emanates from what we show you in the con, which is the blueprint of everything. But there's more. There's monumentally more. But if you understand that Federal Reserve Act 13.3 is the revelation that turns everything upside down, inside up, because you realize that nothing happens in society without money. And if you can create money out of thin air through the Federal Reserve to backstop a criminal apparatus, then there's something wrong in Dodge. And I'll put this question to you. It doesn't matter what side of the ideological spectrum you think you fancy yourself, but where would anybody vote for and approve, whether it's in the Constitution or in the statutes that create the Federal Reserve, that we can use the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mob who lies, steals, and deceives and cheats and deceits and destroys so many millions of Americans to pocket for themselves, which, by the way, is called tyranny. Which, going back to my open with the Day of Atonement, through confession, through the Middle Ages, and through the schisms, it was always about corruption. And as I've mentioned in previous truth bombs, I've always said that, look, you've got two columns of our soul. You've got character, integrity, and dignity versus complicity, duplicity, and hypocrisy. And everybody goes back and forth depending on the situation. And what we've shown you in the con is if you've got perverted, corrupt CEOs at the helm, the fish rots from the head. And there's all sorts of ways that happen, but that's been going on now for over a decade and maybe, quite frankly, many, many decades, but it's never been anywhere close to what it is since we provided tens of trillions of dollars to the people that blew up the world, and then use our institutions, such as the Department of Justice and the FBI and the SEC and everything else, that's supposed to hold white-collar fraud to account, which we created after the Great Depression through a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pecora, who was an inspiration to me because I'm a modern-day Ferdinand Pecora. That's who Patrick Lovell is. But not only was I a producer that had to go answer these questions, that I was able with my team to do what a $90 billion apparatus of our government with tens of thousands of employees weren't able to do, that ultimately, when the institutions fail because they don't have integrity based on dignity and character to actually use the law for what the law is designed for, then you let the genie out of the bag, or the toothpaste out of the toothpaste container, whatever. It just went into mayhem and chaos, which leads us, of course, to all things Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump is the perfect reflection and mirror of everything that I'm telling you. Now, in media, for example, I just happened to watch right before I pushed play on this, and a guy who has been a focal point of a lot of what I've been really beating the drum about, and I need to open your awareness to, is a guy by the name of Russell Brand. A very charismatic, eloquent, quite frankly, very intelligent guy who now I'm going to call Hanoi Jane. And I don't even think he realizes what he's in the midst of necessarily. I don't know, the jury's still out on that, but at the same time, what I've been expressing to you and what I've been exposing to you over the course of the last year and a half or so is in response to mainstream media's disaster. The mainstream media is an absolute failure. I'll remind you, it was mainstream media that had the wise idea through guys who were like CEOs of CBS, Les Moonves, and the president of CNN, Jeff Zucker. They said Trump's good for ratings. So they decided to play Russian roulette with a character that, created all sorts of controversy because of the way that the business model works in media, particularly in mainstream media. And then everybody could pick a side and everybody could argue about it all day, every day. And meanwhile, they played Russian roulette with all of us. And now that's coming to a massive climax, because if Donald Trump wins the 2024 election, democracy is dead. We're done. Okay. I think most of you know that. But the urgency is insane. But this was all created because of two things. Institutions failing, because Donald Trump should have been in prison decades ago. And I've actually demonstrated that through one of my 413 truth bombs on my YouTube page at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, or on TikTok, that reached over 7.5 million people. And still, I haven't been able to generate a movement. Why? Because of what we're up against. Because people aren't listening. They can't understand. They don't see the forest for the trees. Maybe it's because they think they can go to their synagogue or their church and they can pay for cleansing their sins. But we can't, because it is a downward spiral shit show to a disaster that we will not be able to pull out of this death spiral unless tens of millions of you, and by the way, I've been very happy with I've been increasing my views and my shares and that sort of thing. But like, until I've got 30 million followers speaking the same language, there's no way in hell we're going to be able to get the country back for, life, liberty, and justice for all, a country of, by, and for the people. There's no way we were going to get that back unless you all understand what I'm telling you that nobody else will. That Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which is the source of money, provided money to the goons that are criminals that control the entire system. And there's more. There's always more. But what does it relate to Russell Brand? Well, like I said, Russell Brand reminds me of Hanoi Jane. And all over the weekend, there was 4 women that came forward because of these journalists through Channel 4 in the United Kingdom, and I think the Telegraph or whatever the main paper, I think the London Guardian maybe, I can't remember what paper it is, but one that happens to be involved with a lot of salacious type of stuff that's been going on in the UK for a long time. But they brought these women forward, and I think 3 of them said that I saw some more information over the weekend, and it was fascinating. That Russell Brand acted like almost exactly as I had thought he might have during the time period in question when he was doing a lot of drugs and he's a rock star and he had access to thousands of women, and every once in a while he came across women that might not have been too interested in sleeping with him at the time, so he decided to rape them because guys like that do that. And they do that a lot of times because women allow them to do that. Who knows what the psychology is in every single one of these instances. But in the 4 that came forward, one was a 16-year-old woman who may have been, or girl, I guess you should say, may have been predated upon. And who knows if she was raped. I don't think she actually said she was, but maybe she would. Maybe it was consensual. I don't know. Other women have said it started off as consensual, but then he was in a drug-fueled rage, and they described him as some kind of crazy guy that eyes went dark and they thought he was a different human being, and maybe he was on heroin, who knows, and he raped them. Okay, and if he did, that's criminal. But of course, the reaction to that, particularly from the white right-wing circus that has also metamorphosized into grabbing guys that many of us think were, pretty much, liberal, progressive type, yogi type guys that, Russell Brand pretends to be in his Great Awakening, and everybody stay free, which is bullshit. Because at the same time, and what I've observed about, him and everybody else, everybody on that side of the fence, which includes, Jimmy Dore, who's another comedian, and then Glenn Greenwald, who's a decent journalist, but not a great one compared to Matt Taibbi. But then you also have Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, and they all are part and parcel to this thing that has developed really since 2016, okay, and is infused with all things what they claim is not Russiagate, okay? Because everything that are the talking points and the bullet points of Russell Brand over and above or whatever he did in his past and what may have happened with these 4 women that have come forward now at this particular time, where now suddenly Russell Brand is saying, wait a second, this is examples of the deep state silencing us, the independent media, in our dissent, which is fighting for liberty and justice and democracy and freedom. Okay, that's why I call him Hanoi Jane, because he's manipulating what I can actually observe. Now, what he has been doing is using right-wing talking points about pharmaceutical companies, which he might be right about, and I do actually find myself in alignment with all things big pharma and big tech, especially in light of what appears to be monopolies by way of COVID and everything that happened with the vaccines and so forth. But at the same time, I've gotten, the vaccines and all the boosters, and I didn't die. So I trusted the system to be able to fight COVID. And I don't know if I would have gotten taken over by COVID anyway because of my, relative health and my age, and same with my son and so forth. COVID seemed, based on the numbers, and I'm not an expert in COVID, but to take out the elderly and that sort of thing, not to say that that's okay. But I mean, there's specifics about how COVID operated, and it did get weird, but it got weird in so much that it became kind of this thing for Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan, I think, seemed to make all the right points, at least fair points, about ivermectin and some of these other things, and that we saw, like Don Lemon and CNN and all of the reaction from mainstream media, given what they were all saying about COVID and the mask and everything else, and it became this resistance on behalf of all things Trump. Right? You remember, because Trump played out both ways. And then what did Trump say at the time? I mean, he was selling ivermectin? He was selling something that it was like, it became like Trump steaks, quite frankly, as I recall. But meanwhile, it became like this thing where you can't trust big government. You can't trust the corruption because it's infused with all of the big corporate hegemonies, which, Russell Brand has always been correct about. But what happened was in this like chase for eyeballs and algorithms, which equated to money on platforms like YouTube and everything else, he got sucked into this vortex that was led by Tucker Carlson. And Tucker Carlson, as far as I can tell, has always been somewhere in this strange positioning with Trump at Fox and Putin. Okay? Now, if you have been following all of this stuff, throughout the last several years, I mean, one of the big, pushbacks about that was coming from Matt Taibbi based on what he was calling Russiagate. And then Russiagate became a thing, right? He didn't originate Russiagate, but he certainly was involved with it. But of course, this was in context to the Clintons and the FBI and the Steele dossier and all of the things that came with it that were called into question, that once they started to be able to unravel, there was a lot of questions based on a former MI6 guy getting paid by the Clinton Foundation to bring up muck on Trump and everything else, that it was like, okay, then there's no Russiagate because that whole thing was a setup. Meanwhile, like I continue to say throughout all of these truth bombs, the easiest to see connection between Trump and Putin was Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank was laundering money for Russia for well over a decade. And of course, the only bank that was actually doing business with Trump was Deutsche Bank. So that's just the very first base of connection, which was huge. And they were laundering money into estates in West Palm Beach and into Trump Tower and everything else. And so that was part and parcel to that relationship, not to mention whatever Trump was involved with his hotel in Moscow and his beauty pageant and everything else. There was so many direct correlations, but that was back in 2016. But during 2016, what we saw was this rise from this, kind of like a KGB, whatever the abbreviation was for this group that were like tech bots that created these, troll farms that were creating all sorts of like, scenarios to stimulate fights between the right and left during the 2016 election. That's all manifested this many years later into Twitter. That's what this whole thing is with X and everything else. And so what we were able to see is, what I've been observing over the course of the last, let's call it a month where it's gone on overdrive, was that we had Russell Brand, Aaron Mate, and Max Blumenthal, who were all in the anti-Putin, anti-Big Pharma camp that were, they're not anti-Putin, they're anti-war in Ukraine. They're like, it's all about NATO instigating, the war in Ukraine and, basically acting as if Russia has no bigger aims after its invasion to potentially, do what the Soviet Union had done in the past, which is really what it appears to me to be these forces, this battle in Ukraine between all things NATO and Western Europe against the former Soviet Union to try to prevent that from happening, okay? Is Putin Stalin, or is he Brezhnev, or anybody that was part of the Politburo and the former Soviet Union and its impetus towards communism? No, the guy's a freaking, a Don is what he is. He's the largest fucking corrupt enterprise maybe in the world, minus, all of the others, which include, of course, Mohammed bin Sultan and everything Saudi Arabia. But both of those guys are deeply involved with all things that are, finding their way through whatever these, troll bots and these hate farms and these things that are like post, let's call it 2016, with the right-wing billionaires from Mercer to the Koch brothers, to everybody that was involved, and of course, Eric Prince and everything else. But all of these things to be coming together in a way that Russell Brand is one of many that contribute to these notions that, hey, we're fighting for independence and we're fighting for, fighting against the deep state and fighting against this corrupt collusion. Well, they're completely involved with their own corrupt collusion, which I think is absolutely manifested through Putin and all things, whatever their right-wing billionaire contextualization is, that are all in on making sure that Trump becomes the oligarch of the United States, because who would benefit from that? Would it be, a theocracy in Saudi Arabia? Would it be an oligarch in charge of Russia in a world that wants to maintain the paradigm of oil? Oh, yeah. And that's really the undercurrent of it all. And I don't know if Mr. Awakening has any context of understanding that. He picked two issues out of all of them, missing what I've been trying to give Russell Brand the entire time what I'm giving you for free. And I got to find the ability to connect with tens of millions of people. The Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to pump tens of trillions of dollars to this system that everybody's calling the deep state on the right, but at the same time is still fueling their deep state, because this is a Game of Thrones fight for control of Congress, control of the White House, and ultimately control of the Federal Reserve. And that's the state of affairs. And at the end of the day, you look at all of these presidential candidates out there, and we just found out that, for example, Biden is way behind in the polls after the 91 indictments and everything that's been proven about Donald Trump, and is going to continue to, but not in the court of law, because the court of law, the Department of Justice, and the way the system works is it's going so slow. It never held Trump to account, quite frankly, because it reveals so much of what I'm telling you the main system of power is in. I feel like they're bleeding us on, they're leading us on to create these identity wars to make sure that you don't understand what it is that I'm telling you that is the exact reflection of what Donald Trump is showing us, because the government of the United States has revealed and has been demonstrating that he is defrauding the United States through racketeering, using illegal documentation fraud, corrupt attorneys, and corrupt judges. That's pretty much the sum total, in addition to what's happening in, for example, New York and the New York AG's office with all the control fraud through insurance and the appraisal fraud and all of the things that Donald Trump did to get loans to lever against his assets in Manhattan to be able to do the stuff that he did with Deutsche Bank, which was really his business model. You remember he always said it's okay to go bankrupt? I think he went bankrupt 6 times. That's part and parcel to this. But what it really is the reflection of what we show you in the con, that actually the only difference is that what we show you actually took out tens of millions of people illegally, and then we gave tens of trillions of dollars to the institutions that pulled this off, that ended up buying our courts to basically let Wall Street get away with this. The connection to Donald Trump, particularly if you look out there and you see guys on Twitter, for example, Rob Reiner, or John Cusack, and so many of the others that are like, oh my God, we're about to go into fascism. We've got to save democracy. Oh my God, Merrick Garland and the DOJ is doing their job, and all of these other things. And it's like, no, first of all, we lost our democracy long ago. And what you're emulating, guys, is that you don't give a shit that tens of millions of people got fucking crushed by this system. What you care about is whether or not you're going to be able to survive Trump, which is a real fucking fear, of which Russell Brand unknowingly, I think, is participating in, because he can't see the forest for the trees like everybody else. And by the way, all of these different maneuvers, all of these different sorts of tactics are things that both the CIA and the KGB have been involved with for the last 50, 60, 70 years. JFK assassination, whatever. I'm not going off the reservation, because it's all continuity. And oh yeah, by the way, for all of you who know that, with Bobby Kennedy coming in and questioning the CIA and everything else, who was the law firm that was involved with Federal Reserve Act 13.3? None other than Sullivan and Cromwell, who incidentally were also deeply involved with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. But who is Sullivan and Cromwell? They're the law firm that gave birth to the CIA. Okay, so there's that. There's so much going on so fast, but the bottom line is that so much comes through media to get on all of these different sort of dystopian, doublespeak, like with Russell Brand, who's such a great verbalizer, and his skill with the English language is like nobody I've ever seen. But at the same time, the guy is a rube. He is a rube for Putin. He is a rube for Tucker Carlson. How do I know? Tucker Carlson, and by the way, the whole right that is circling the wagons around Russell Brand right now is saying the same thing, that, they're saying this is defamation. Are you kidding me? This is deep state. This and this and that. What did Tucker Carlson do last week with regards to this guy, Larry Sinclair, and former President Barack Obama? And if anybody's ever heard my truth bombs, you know that I'm not a fan of Barack Obama, because I don't think that personally he got involved with some gay tryst on fucking freebase and crack with this guy who looks like he's been in jail for the last 3 decades, pretty much off and on, and by his own admission on Tucker Carlson's bullshit hip job, which is ultimately defamation. But you know what Barack Obama did? He allowed the fucking Wall Street, who raped and pillaged the American dream and the middle class and upward mobility and homeowners and pensioners and everything by what we show you in the con, And, he let them get away with raping tens of millions of people. Seriously. That's what they did, using illegal documentation fraud, which I'm telling you is the government's demonstrating against Donald Trump. Wow, I had intended to make this thing so much easier and faster and spirited and fun and kind of laugh a little bit about it, but it's not. There's nothing funny about it. This is just the end of the fucking world, people. Not only do we have all of these situations going on with, climate side and, the earth not being able to maintain life on this planet because of our continued paradigm and usage of fossil fuel. But meanwhile, what is Biden doing right now? He's creating a relationship with Saudi Arabia to create, full military defense like we do in South Korea and Japan, in a way that's just like, you know what, hey, we're going to have a clean energy revolution, but don't worry about it. We're still going to maintain our relationship with the swing producer Saudi Arabia, who is deeply involved with 9/11, who pays Donald Trump and his children because they're playing both sides, and yet they're in the driver's seat, and they're a tiny country in comparison to the United States, but we just need their oil. And we let them go because we don't want to manage it. We let them be a theocracy and cut off the heads of all of their people. And meanwhile, we're doing all of these, gymnastics talking about democracy. But meanwhile, we, create this sort of convergence where we support Nazis, whether it's a religious theocracy or some version of just, this massive corruption. I mean, my God, I'm not finding the perfect words here today, but I need you to understand the urgency of this situation. That's why I'm leading a populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption. That's why if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency and integrity and beauty, we come together in unity, we will force what is our destiny to create a clean new deal. The clean new deal is to make you realize that we just spent $70 trillion to a corrupt racketeering enterprise that put the money into their own pockets, just like this guy, Senator Menendez in New Jersey, where they found gold and all sorts of, money in his wallets for traveling cash. The guy's corrupt up to his eyeballs, and he's not going to leave either, because even though he's a Democrat, because the system is so far gone, everybody's like, go ahead. Trump proved that if you're corrupt, that's the way to do it. Nobody's going to hold you accountable in America because nobody gives a shit about the law. Nobody gives a shit about upward mobility. Nobody ever had to fight for justice and liberty for everybody because they just got it handed to them on a silver platter. They just want their credit card so that they can go put some more stuff at IKEA or, whatever they're buying. And then one day they rug pull us because of the nature of everything that I'm showing you, in which the only people that get bailed out are the guys that destroyed everybody. That's the fucking coup d'etat. That's the goddamn trick. That's the whole system that has destroyed everybody. And the real coup d'etat was in 2009 when Wall Street got away with it. It wasn't the insurrection. It was just the white supremacists saying, look, if they got away with it, we can get away with it. Guys, it's a train wreck. It's a monumental shit show. It's all going to hell in a handbasket unless tens of millions of you join me in a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. Failure is not an option. Onwards and upwards. Rise, roar, revolt.